Across North Africa, his armies thundered. A Muslim king who united Morocco by terror. He built a nation out of dust, turned Christians into an army of slaves and worked them to death to build an immortal palace. Mulai Ismail's royal palace of Meknes. Ismail is born into the Alawite tribe that rules Morocco. In 1660, that rule is shaken as rebel tribes plunge the nation into civil war. The wars kill Ismail's father, the Alawite king, then engulf the reign of his elder brother. In 1672, the throne falls to 26-year-old Ismail. The Ismail of legend takes shape in these decades of carnage. It is said that for nearly 15 years, his saddle is his throne. The man behind the myth will subdue the rebels and repel the invaders on a mission, he believes, given him by God. Ismail does not squander talent. Craftsmen are separated from the unskilled and put to work creating the palace's courtly interiors. In each courtyard is an Islamic fountain. The grandest is created by the king. Called the Serpentine Fountain, its form is found nowhere else in the Arab world. Beaten on the slightest provocation, many a poor fellow worked under the stimulus of the stick until he fell down and was carried off to die. At nightfall, the slaves are led to damp cellars below the palace. Here they receive just enough rations to preserve their strength. Then they are locked in to await the dawn. Till then they are free to wonder when and if a ransom will come. Cultural differences continue to breed misunderstanding. In 1699, Ismail tries to seal a treaty, as Arabs do, through marriage. He writes to King Louis XIV to ask for his daughter's hand. These mounts are Ismail's pride. His records of their bloodlines date back 3 centuries. Were these elegant patios and lush gardens the handiwork of a man, rumoured to sever the head of each slave who helped him mount his horse? San Simeon, California, 1951. In a magical place called the Enchanted Hill, joyful laughter has fallen silent. Festive tunes have turned to mourning. For the lord of the castle, William Randolph Hearst, is dead. Through an extraordinary life, Hearst never stopped building. He put together a media empire and a vast art collection. In the Roaring Twenties and beyond, movie stars and politicians lent an air of myth to his most celebrated creation, Hearst Castle. The California masterpiece seized a place in legend through the determination of one man and the guiding hands of three powerful women. In a French chateau, the stone fireplace was cut into squares for its trip to the New World. Of the glamorous guests invited to his home, Hearst asked one favor: that they join him for a nightly social hour and dinner in the main dining room, center of castle life. At the authentic monastery dining table, bottles of ketchup and mustard reminded diners of the estate's rustic origins as a cattle ranch. Here, Charles Lindbergh and Winston Churchill rubbed elbows with Valentino and Garbo, Louis B. Mayer and Errol Flynn. Always across from Hearst sat the woman whose beauty lit up the castle's golden age, Marion Davies. In 1917, Hearst had been making films for just 2 years when he focused his vast influence on the actress's career. Just 20, Davies was already a Broadway veteran and dancer in Ziegfeld's Follies. Hearst's 14-year marriage was by now settling into an amicable separation. His wife retired to an estate back east, while Davies became mistress of the Enchanted Hill. At the castle, the buoyant starlet was a perfect foil for the painfully shy Hearst. She played hostess to a parade of glitterati as they indulged in every pastime from riding to swimming to tennis. While Hearst stayed behind the scenes, Marion Davies hammed it up with the likes of Charlie Chaplin, a frequent guest. Madonna and child figures dominate the suite, giving it the air of a monastery. Yet Hearst's life here was far from cloistered. Through telephone, teletype, even shortwave radio, Hearst kept an iron grip on his global holdings. Newspapers and newsreels were flown in daily on the castle's airstrip. Editors and politicians gathered at his table, seeking the magnate's advice. Hearst's opinions on everything from war to temperance penetrated nearly every American home. In shaping the news, the Baron Hearst became one of the century's most controversial newsmen. In his Olympian retreat, Hearst must have felt immune to the whims of fortune that routinely swamped men below. In 1937, it all ended. Thailand, literally, land of the free. Since its creation in the 13th century, her people have woven a dazzling tapestry of culture and preserved it through waves of invaders. In 1767, the Thais moved their capital to the nation's fertile rice bowl. Floating villages and teeming markets arose around the royal palace of Bangkok. Here, early in the 19th century, Thailand's king died as the nation faced its gravest threat, invasion, by the great powers of Europe. As Thailand's neighbors fell, a humble crusader rose to the fight. He was clad only in the robes of a monk, but he was armed with his people's ancient faith. April 1851. Momentous news travels up the Chao Phraya River, breaking the stillness of a secluded temple. Here, for 27 years, a half-brother of the king has reverently followed the path of the Buddha. Now, Abbot Mongkut's serene life is shattered by grim tidings. The king is dead. In middle age, the monk is called to take the throne as the new king of Thailand. Thailand's monarchy takes its name from the saga's hero, the intrepid Prince Rama. As Rama IV, Mongkut takes on the heroic mantle as catastrophe draws near. European nations are carving Asia up. Unbeknownst to Europe, Mongkut's years in a monastery have armed him against this onslaught. In the traditional Thai center of learning, he became fluent in English and French and studied the history of the Western powers. The monk-turned-king knows his enemies better than anyone in Southeast Asia. Carefully, Mongkut lays plans for a surprise offensive. He will confront the enemy, not with guns, but gifts. Opium. Yet when the king's barrage of goodwill is over, the superpowers are disarmed. None dare invade Thailand for fear of sparking war with the others. Against the many-headed dragon of colonialism, King Mongkut has scored a stunning victory. For now. The emperor has died without a male heir. The throne has fallen to a woman. To the rest of Europe, it might as well be empty. From three sides, France, Prussia, Spain and Bavaria bear down on Vienna to snatch the Habsburg crown and carve up the empire. But there, the new queen calmly awaits them. Her name, Maria Theresa. She is the first woman to inherit the Habsburg throne, and few believe she can keep it. The one exception, her devoted husband, Francis, Duke of Lorraine. She tells him, "I am only a woman, but I have the heart of a king." She quickly proves it. More than 100 years before, a Habsburg hunting in the Vienna woods came upon a stream. With one drink, he pronounced the spot Schönbrunn, beautiful spring. He liked it so much, he built a hunting lodge nearby. On its humble foundation, Maria Theresa creates the new Schönbrunn. Adding vast wings and an extra floor, she paints it in what becomes known as Habsburg yellow, a color that soon adorns royal buildings throughout the empire. Here, the symphony develops under such masters as Franz Joseph Haydn. Another composer, whose music will one day fill the theater, makes his debut at the palace at the age of 6. In 1762, Maria Theresa invites this child prodigy to play for her. His name, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It was a fairy tale, Mozart's father proudly wrote his wife. But his pride soon turns to embarrassment. Wolfgang ends the performance not with a bow, but a leap across the mirror room into Her Highness's lap. But in 1765, reality shatters this fantasy land. Maria Theresa's dear husband, Francis, her chief aid and comfort, dies. In 1889, in a fit of madness, Crown Prince Rudolf kills his mistress and himself. Not long after, the king's beloved Queen Sissi, confused and alone, is murdered in Geneva. The shattered king writes, "I have been spared nothing." Or so he imagines. The final blow comes when the king's nephew and heir is assassinated in a city called Sarajevo. They were descendants of the sun. They were called the Rator. In the 15th century, the desert's chosen people were thrust down the path of greatness. Their journey began with a murder. Assassins from a rival tribe cut their king's throat. Before they could find his son, a drummer warned him. Prince Joda fled into the Marwa desert. In his long exile, the prince became a king and led his people in a guerrilla war. Against legions of enemies, they took back Marwa, stone by stone. Around 1470, King Joda sought a site for a fortress to guard his hard-won kingdom. An oracle pointed the way to the Mountain of the Birds. The 400-foot-high volcanic plateau gave Joda an eagle's view over the Rator domain. So their spirits would guard his fort. He buried 4 men alive in a foundation. Above them he built a citadel that would become legendary as Meheringar, Fortress of the Sun. By the end of the 19th century, the Mountain of the Birds had been renamed the Hill of Strife. Of its diminished fortress, Rudyard Kipling nostalgically wrote, It might have been built by Titans and colored by the morning sun. Women here number in the hundreds. They arrive as children. Separated from the male slaves, they undergo their own education. By the time they reach their mid-teens, they are expert in dance, sewing, and the erotic arts. Their only purpose, to provide the Sultan pleasure and the Empire an heir. Officially, they are denied the power granted male slaves. But within the harem, one beautiful slave girl will change all that. In her own home, the Queen hopes to set a new standard for Portugal. The kitchen of Sintra has everything a royal house requires, including the new spices from the East. But the cost of transporting them all the way to the edge of Europe makes spices too expensive for the rest of Portugal. They go without and are left to bland meals of boiled meats and vegetables. But the importance of spices is far more than a matter of taste. The spice trade is bringing in wealth and transforming nations across Europe. Reclining on a luxurious balcony, Emperor Akbar the Great watches as two elephants fight to the death. Contests of life and death are common in the Red Fort's playing fields, but this is no mere sporting event. The elephants' masters are Akbar's sons. At stake are all the riches of India. This tumultuous battle will determine the next emperor of the Indian subcontinent and set in motion the triumph of the great Mughal Empire. At the crossroads of two great trade routes, the city teemed with caravans and markets, and artisans of rare and exotic crafts. When old age compelled him to abdicate the throne, Charles had only two requests of his son. One, that Philip continue to battle heresy to the death, and two, that he build a grand tomb for the royalty of Spain. Philip vows to fulfill his father's wishes. In 1561, he marches out to the granite hills above the small mining town of Escorial. The name means slag heap, but the king will transform the town into what many will call the eighth wonder of the world. From this stone seat, Philip will watch his family tomb rise. But now he envisions much more than his father asked for. Philip sees a gigantic monastery, housing not only a tomb, but a basilica, library, and palace. Over 1 million tons of granite will go into what will become the largest building in the world, one containing nearly 4,000 rooms and 100 miles of corridors. The heretics he can't touch, he keeps an eye on from the most lavish wing of the monastery, the king's library. Above, frescoes by Pellegrino Tebaldi tout the liberal arts and sciences. But Philip's purposes for this room aren't so liberal. Here, a trusted group of monks help the king get to know his enemies through their heretical works. Among the library's 100,000 religious books are treatises by such troublemakers as Martin Luther and John Calvin. "I sent my ships to fight against men," the king roars, "not winds." For Spain, it is the death blow. The Armada's cost has emptied the treasury. Its defeat shatters Spanish prestige, but not Philip's faith. Over the next 10 years, he launches 3 more expeditions against England. All fail. But the reign of the Doges was anything but serene. Under one of them, in 1202, Venice reached her turning point. His name? Doge Enrico Dandolo, 88, bent with age, and stone blind. Europe had become used to Venetian leaders of limited power, but none so clever. For Dandolo was about to use them to transform his most serene republic into the glittering capital of a third of the known world. Her market stalls overflowed with the bounty of the Adriatic and the silk and spices of the Orient. Much of her wealth came through an enormously profitable truce with the Muslims, an arrangement that galled Christian Europe as it emptied its coffers mounting crusades. Some found guilty would be led to sweltering Attic prisons, others to dungeons below. Still others were marched to cells across a walkway called the Bridge of Sighs. Within this prison, the condemned etched their despair in stone. "From the man I trust, may God defend me. From the man I trust not, I will defend myself." Another said simply, "Learn to suffer." Poets and romantics the world over mourned Venice's fall. Lord Byron yearned for a return of the ancient rascal who so craftily thrust Venice's greatness upon her. Oh, for an hour of old blind Dandolo, Byzantium's conquering foe. La Serenissima, the most serene republic, was no more. Yet, for her thousands of visitors, Venice remains serenely magical. Poised impossibly on her lagoon, few can arrive at the Molo, glimpse the Grand Palace, and not be moved to agree with the poet who wrote 500 years ago. So long as the clear skies contain stars, so long as the human race carries on its generations upon the earth, the splendor of the Venetians will be celebrated for all eternity.